The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here with us this morning for our member webinar, Meet the Jobs Australia Workplace Relations Team. We are so thrilled to have you here with us this morning. So today we will meet our Workplace Relations team and discuss the hot topics in the WR space at this moment, especially during the past few months. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please just write them in the questions section and also pop your details in there as well. If we have time at the end of the webinar, our team will answer a few questions. However, if we do run out of time, our team will get back to you post-webinar. So let's meet our fabulous Triple M Workplace Relations team members. First up, we have Margaret. Margaret is our Workplace Relations team leader. So Margaret, tell us a bit about yourself and your experience in the WR field.
Well, thanks, Brett. I have been in this team for 9.5 years. Not that I'm counting, but it has been a while. Previous to WR, it was industrial relations. So my main focus, as well as working with these great guys, is also providing HR support more broadly to the sector. And that presents itself by way of organisational support, mentoring, training. I've been lucky enough to travel around this country and work with many members in that time. Mediation as well. So in that 9.5 years, I feel as though there's not too many topics that haven't crossed my table in that space, but if anyone has an interesting question or topic that can beat that, by all means, write that into the questions list. So in the last 12 months, we did a bit of a reshuffle in our team and moved away from industrial relations into a more workplace relations. It's actually a much nicer way, I feel, of talking about our workforce and how we work with them. And we've got some new team members as a result of that, and you'll be talking to them shortly. But yeah, I guess for me, it's been a fabulous time working in this team for the changes that have happened. And for the people that I've worked with in the past, but mostly for the members, feeling as though we're doing something for them and here for them is what kind of gets me out of bed every day. So thanks, Brett.
Fantastic. We're definitely lucky to have Margaret here. She's a wealth of knowledge and experience, which is fantastic. So on to you, Max. Max is one of our workplace relations officers here at JA. So tell us a bit about yourself, Max.
Thanks, Brett. So I, as a young person, worked in lots of different industries and saw all the different cultures that each individual industry sort of has, which got me interested in workplace relations. So I was actually trained by the Fair Work Ombudsman in workplace relations. So I've got experience covering a lot of different awards and different industries through my time in industrial relations. And I decided to make the move to the not-for-profit industry and start working at JA because I wanted to start working with organisations who are making a difference out in the world and find it a bit more rewarding as well.
That's great. Thank you, Max. And on to our newest team member, Megan. So welcome, Megan. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you. Yes. So as a newcomer to Jobs Australia, my past history was working in the education union sector of the close to 10 years in Western Australia before making the move recently over to Victoria. So it's lovely to be here and working with our non-for-profit sector employers. It's nice to be on the other side and see the other side of the table when it comes to issues and processes. So it's certainly eye-opening and we have a great team working together on it.
Fantastic. So let's move on with our discussion for this webinar. So a question for the team here. Given the challenges that have been presented this year, what have been the hot topics in the IR space?
Certainly, so I'll probably start with COVID. being the main demographic at the moment, which is a huge portion of our calls. So anywhere from JobKeeper to stand downs, anything COVID related, we have fielded a lot of queries on.
It's really thrown a spanner in the works, as I'm sure all of you know. It's really changed the landscape at the moment of workplace relations. There are a few changes to awards. So award modernisation we're currently at the end of that process. So part of that includes changes to the SHADS award with casual loadings, and there'll be some other award changes coming out as well. And there's also, this was earlier in the last financial year, there were changes to personal leave accruals as well, which I'll touch on later in the webinar.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as a result of all of that, redundancy in the workplace is something that probably ticks over for many of our members, and yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit later. But I think those things that we mentioned, the COVID-19, the casual loading, changes to personal leave and redundancy has certainly been some of the main topics for us in this certainly last 6 or so months. So.
Yeah, there has definitely been a lot to discuss in the past few months. So Megan, on to you. You guys mentioned COVID-19 specifically. What have been the complexities for members in this space?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess we've been there from the start in the industrial field of watching it unfold. So we went from, that area of uncertainty about what is COVID to a situation of it's here in Australia, and now we are dealing with it in the workplace. So it's hard to think of a time that we didn't have JobKeeper or different parameters available to us when it was just the grey area of what to do. So during that time, we were dealing with just the pure stand downs of staff, which I'll come to. But the real saving grace and also a bugbear has been the JobKeeper program that has been offered by the government. So the main questions that we had on JobKeeper was the eligibility. Now, the hard thing that we found in workplace relations with that is that isn't governed by the Fair Work Commission. So that determination is made by the ATO of both the eligibility of the organisation and the individual eligibility of the employees. So we had vast knowledge on it, but when it came to giving a definite answer whether an organisation was eligible, we always referred back to the ATO. So then once we had the situation of the JobKeeper, we then had the different changes that were enacted under the Fair Work Act for that period of time, which gave organisations the ability to move their staff around, reduce their staff, keep their staff, put companies or organisations basically on hold while COVID was running its course. So some of the stand down provisions were great because it allowed an organisation to stand down their staff without having to put them on leave without pay, force other provisions on the staff. Now, it did lead to employees receiving more than what they were entitled to in remuneration-wise, but because of the short time frame that they had to work with, that's why it came about. So a lot of the common questions that we had on COVID was if the staff member was to take leave, such as personal leave, and there was no personal leave available to them, would they actually be in receipt of JobKeeper? So the 1,500 as a golden rule is always maintained at the absolute minimum to each eligible employee. I mean, that is good, but then we have a lot of staff who have been refusing to come back to work now, who think that they can just stay at home and receive the $1,500 as an absolute minimum. but it kind of goes a little bit further. And what we'll see now is each state, as we progress, will have different restrictions lifted. I mean, currently in Victoria, we're in a bit of a different circumstance to, let's say, WA. So returning staff back to the workplace, that is a tricky question, and we are running some additional webinars about what we're going to look like in a post-COVID era. But the main issue that we've had is organisations that weren't eligible for JobKeeper, what they could do with their staff. So there is a section under the Fair Work Act called Section 524, which is actually a stand down of staff. Now, the issue with that is that the Fair Work Commission set quite a high benchmark to obtain that. So there needs to be a stoppage of work, which is outside of the employer's control. So generally, if the organisation is shut down due to COVID or an outbreak, that would then give them access to stand down. So that means that the organisation is not liable to pay their employees for that time, even if they had, let's say, 500 hours worth of leave, it would still be on leave without pay. So that's why the benchmark is set high in obtaining that. So just quickly to touch on returning employees and working in an essential service area is that if the members go to WorkSafe Australia, there is fantastic resources about returning your staff back to work, having a COVID-safe workplace and doing risk assessments. So that's a really important tool that our members can use when they're looking at that.
Megan, it's fair to say, I think, and you can comment on this, that in the early stages of COVID, when our phones were running completely hot, I wonder if you could just talk to the point of stand down where the employer wasn't in receipt of the payment.
Yeah.
And where some of our members were standing staff down through to shortage of work, because that not only caused levels of anxiety for our members, but it caused levels of anxiety for us in the office on that point. What do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so it was really tricky, and it's quite actually a grey area in regards to standing down staff. It can't be because you've had a reduction in work because of COVID. There must be a stoppage of work. So reading that clause alone, there's a lot of ambiguity in there that would lead an organisation to the belief that they can just stand down their staff. And we did have a number of organisations who did that, and there was a number of claims that were put in front of the Commission to do with wage claims for organisations that had incorrectly stood down their staff. So that is a real issue. And it's always important to seek advice from the WR team if you are not in receipt of JobKeeper and you are looking at standing down your staff, because there are provisions that may not apply to you in your circumstance. So incorrect use of the stand down provisions under the Act could lead to a wage claim being brought against the organisation if not used correctly. So that's important to bear in mind.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan. There definitely is a lot of questions around what a post-COVID workplace will look like. Now, Max, you mentioned casual loading earlier. So what are the IR implications of the casual loading provisions and the changes to personal leave?
And this is the dry section of the webinar, I'm afraid. It's going to be about maths and all those fun things. So with casual rates, and this only applies to the SHADS award, the casual loading provisions. So what previously was the case with the SHADS award until the 1st of July this year was that when casual staff worked on Saturdays or Sundays, or when they worked overtime, they didn't receive their casual loading, the 25%, as well as the penalty rate. They would receive the penalty rate instead of the casual loading. That's quite an old-fashioned way of treating a casual loading. So as part of the award modernisation for the SHADS award, the Commission decided to change that. So casual staff will now get their casual loading as well as the penalty rate. One difficulty that we're finding that many employers are having is how to calculate the casual loading as well as the penalty rate. So the way that it works is that the casual loading, 25%, will be calculated on the base rate of pay. So that's the hourly rate for a full-time or part-time staff member at that same classification. And the penalty rate is applied to that same base rate of pay as well. So, for example, the casual employee working on a Saturday will get the normal hourly rate plus their 25% casual loading calculated on the normal hourly rate, and then a 50% Saturday loading on that normal hourly rate as well. So in effect, they're getting the hourly rate plus 75%. I know that many employers misinterpret that, and they apply the casual loading to the hourly rate of pay and then times that whole figure by 50%. But that's not the case. You would end up overpaying your staff. So that is a conversation that we've been having with members quite often over the phone, just clarifying how to perform those calculations. And it's a resource that we're looking at putting together to make it available on our website and have it a lot clearer in writing as well. It's not a huge change, but because it just happened last week, we are including it in this webinar, and most of our members do have staff under the SHADS award, so it will apply to many of our attendees today. And just as a clarification as well, it does, the change applies from the first full pay period on or after July 1st. So in the same way that the annual wage increases do, if you have a pay period that straddles the 1st of July, then the changes to the casual loading rate won't apply until the next pay period. I'm happy to take questions on this toward the end of the webinar as well if we have time, because it can be confusing hearing maths explained to you verbally. Another change that I'm talking about today is the Mondelez decision, which occurred last year around August, and it was a federal court decision that was that applied to an interpretation of the Fair Work Act. So what happened in this case was that there were some shift workers working for a company called Mondelez who were working 12-hour shifts, and they were full-time staff, but when they called in sick for one day, they would be using up 12 hours of their 76 hours of leave that they were getting a year. And they argued that they should be entitled to 10 days, so 120 hours for them, because their shifts each day was 12 hours long. The court upheld that decision, and because it's an interpretation to the way that the Fair Work Act it's a change to the way it should have been interpreted this whole time, they say, rather than an actual change to the Act itself. It does apply retrospectively. So what that means is that part-time staff or full-time staff who work unusual hours rather than the normal 7.6 per day are all entitled to 10 days of personal leave per year. It's not pro rata, so a part-time staff member won't receive 5 days leave. The confusing part is that it does change the way that the payroll system needs to calculate the personal leave. So if you have a part-time staff member who works less hours every day that they work than a full-time staff member, they will still get less personal leave in terms of hours than a full-timer. I believe the calculation is 1 day of personal leave every 5.2 weeks for a part-timer or full-timer. And we are getting lots of questions about how this should be expressed on pay slips or how many hours this equates to. And the answer is that it shouldn't be expressed in hours at all, and it should just be expressed in terms of days of leave. So if a part-time staff member calls in sick on a day that they work 3 hours, then that 3 hours is considered 1 day of their 10-day entitlement. If a part-time staff member calls in sick on a day when they're working 10 hours, that 10-hour block also counts as 1 day of their 10-day entitlement. So it can be confusing, and I'm not sure how the individual payroll systems like MyOb and Xero are working those out, but we do have a lot more information on what this means for our members on our website in detail as well. But essentially, we are saying that it's currently the law of the land. So all our members, we are recommending that they follow that and express their paid sick leave in terms of days rather than hours. There is an appeal that's being raised at the High Court as well with government support, but as far as I know, there's no date set for that one. And until that appeal does occur, it is currently the law to treat personal leave in this way. So because of that, we have this information sheet on our website, which will go out as a link in the email that we send out after the webinar as well, just to make sure all our members are across that.
And Max, just back to the Mondelez case, a lot of organisations do get confused in regards to personal leave and part-time, because a lot of our modern enterprise bargaining agreements do pro-rata their personal leave in a number of circumstances, or it has been custom and practice in the past. The question that we've had put to us a lot is that if the High Court is successful and we are going to pro-rata all of it, what happens to everything we've done until now?
Yeah, so that is a good question. So what we are recommending, some organisations who do have concerns about that, what will we do? We'll have to do a whole new personal leave audit if the appeal is successful. We're recommending, if you do have those concerns, doing the audit and interpreting the personal leave accruals in terms of days, and expressing that to the employees, but also just keeping your old calculations on the back burner, but still ticking out in the background so that you can, if the appeal is successful, you can just immediately switch back and that's all up to date, just sort of on the down low, I suppose.
I guess one of the other things that raises, Max and Megan, you can both chime in here, is we're particularly talking about the casual loading. That sends my mind back to, well, the responsibilities of employers in ensuring that people really are casuals when they're casuals, and perhaps comment on some of the calls that we've had on the conversion of contract staff into permanent staff. And what might the triggers for that be? Because I think in actual fact this all intersects into that, and maybe as a hot topic, this notion of funded positions through to a period of time. At what point of time we're talking to our members about conversions there? So Max, you can chime in, because Megan, for those people you can't see, Megan did a beautiful direction straight over to Max. Then perfect hand signal.
So with casual conversion, I mean, different awards and different enterprise agreements will have clauses specifying when casual employees will be entitled to become a permanent employee. So for example, in the SHADS award, if a casual employee has been engaged on a regular and systematic pattern of work for 12 months, then they're entitled to request to be converted to part-time or full-time, depending on how many hours a week they work. Some other enterprise agreements will say that casual staff cannot be engaged if they're going to be working a regular pattern, and that should automatically be a permanent staff member. But aside from that, that will depend on a case-by-case basis. Aside from that, there was a recent case with WorkPack, which we have been receiving calls about, where a casual employee was found not to be a casual employee. There are a few different factors in that decision. An example of one is that the employee was receiving their rosters 12 months in advance. So they had a reasonable expectation that they were going to still have work 12 months from now or up to 12 months from now with their employer. And another issue with that case, which we're getting lots of calls about, is that the employer WorkPack was told that they're not allowed to offset any annual leave payment they owed the employee with the casual loading that they'd already paid. Again, that's very case specific. The WorkPack decision doesn't have wide-reaching impacts or implications across any industry, really. One of the factors in that decision, I believe, was that the employee wasn't told in their employment contract how much their casual loading was, how much of their wage was a casual loading. It was just sort of on the word of the employer that they were getting a casual loading. And so they couldn't calculate how much, how much casual loading they had paid to this employee to offset their entitlements. So that was one factor in why they were told that they couldn't do that. We do have calls from members who are concerned that this means that casual staff are entitled to annual leave, which isn't the case. But it is a good reminder, as you said, that we need to make sure that the casual staff we have employed should be employed as casuals. So ways that you can mitigate those, or ways you can sort of ensure that, is by having a strong pool of casual staff, so that if casual staff are rejecting shifts, which they have an entitlement to do, or if they are ill and that sort of stuff, then the organisation isn't put out and you can just quickly call up another casual staff member, and they're sort of, in that way, then they're used on a relief basis and rotating as well, so that you don't end up with one person who is intrinsically tied to the role. And so then, really would have an ongoing expectation of work if they're the only person who can do it. If you have a role where, you really need one person in that role consistently, then I would say you wouldn't be having a casual employee in that role, and you go for a permanent or fixed term employee to ensure that consistency.
Yeah, because, sorry, Megan, one of the things about casual work, the very nature of it, should be intermittent and sporadic. So when you think about those two words, that's not a 12-month contract in advance. So I think that, and the very nature of much of the work that happens across our sector, of course, is done by casuals, and it's important work. But for employers, it's just being really mindful at the start of that employment relationship about, what is this position? Is it really truly casual? Should it be on a contract? And you're right when you're talking about rosters, because a true casual is actually able to knock back some work when it's offered. And so we get people saying, well, what can I do about this staff member who, constantly is knocking back work? Well, that's actually the nature of casual work. And so that's why you would have a pool of casuals. And so I think that whole thing is just a timely reminder for members to, just be mindful about what true casual work is.
Exactly.
And have discussions, ring us and we can debate it till the cows come home, because it's just one of those things that happen constantly. Sorry, Megan, over to you.
Oh, and you did mention funding agreements as well in the question, and we are aware that particularly with NDIS funding, that does sort of push a casualisation of the workforce. So if you are finding yourself in this situation where you feel you don't have an option but to have a casual employee because of the funding agreement, but you have concerns that this employee shouldn't actually be engaged as a casual or might properly be engaged as a part-timer, give us a call and we'll have a chat with it about you. Have a chat with you about it.
And I'm sorry to refer everything back to COVID, but just on the WorkPack matter, we've had the job keeper situation, and now we have the job maker situation, which is where the government is having the round table, square table, a table with employer industries, unions and the government to sort out a lot of industrial relations issues that we're facing in Australia at the moment. And the casualisation of workforce has been on their list. So it's going to be interesting to see what that overhaul will bring through the job maker process by the Australian government, if we are going to get any traction and movement, because it is something that has been in the burning background for years, but this has just brought it to light.
That's right.
Fantastic. Thank you, Max and the team, for that detailed discussion. I'm sure that you will have many questions following this webinar. So moving on to Margaret. Margaret, redundancy in the environment we currently find ourselves in would appear extreme. Why has this come about?
Thanks, Brett. Well, I guess in a general sense, whether it's in this environment or not, but I guess redundancy in this environment has been something that members have been, challenged with in thinking moving forward. But there are many reasons that a member might find themselves in a situation of considering redundancy quite outside of the COVID environment and including that. And that could be reduced funding or the ebbs and flows of funding, because the very nature of funding, there's no certainty to it. You know, they say about certainty, we've only got certainty about two things in life: death and taxes. Funding isn't one of them. So the fact that it comes and goes for many of our organisations creates often the environment where they need to revisit that. Programs that come and go as a result of funding as well. And because much of our funded work relates to client work, a lot of clients are now making decisions about who they'll work with and what they want from our member organisations, which has also thrown another layer of complexity into the mix, certainly over the last few years. And as a result of that, the need to cease or reduce some programs might be the catalyst to start thinking about redundancy. And I guess where I see us playing a key role in that is, of course, the decisions that an organisation make are truly their decisions. But I think, well, I'd like to think that we can help keep people on the straight and narrow around redundancy and how it applies and to whom it applies and what the obligations are. And you know, there are two main obligations to redundancy. And one of those is to consult with staff. And that's not just telling them on the way out the door at 4 o'clock on a Friday, oh, by the way, next week there's a redundancy. You actually have to consult and give them an opportunity to bring back to the table some thoughts and ideas that they might have. And the other obligation is genuinely considering redeployment opportunities. So I think that we've actually got another program coming up in a couple of weeks that will deal just with redundancy, and we'll go more into detail about that then. But, you know, providing information to staff as soon as possible when those decisions have been made is critical. Give them as much information as you can. I think too much information is actually the ideal, because if you don't give enough information, people make that up. And when you're in an environment of change, that's critically important for your workforce. And also discussing and supporting strategies to minimise the impact for staff, I think, is critical in a HR environment. So I guess that it's not something that employers take lightly, and I know that, we know that from the calls. You know, many of our members are terribly upset and distressed at the thought that this is a path they might have to go down. But I'd like to think, as I said earlier, that we can support people through and at least give some level of comfort that, you know, what they are doing is within legislation, within the Fair Work Act, and actually help them down that path. So, yeah, I think it's something that's always with us, but it has certainly raised its little head a bit more in the last few months.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, Margaret. And now moving on to a question for the whole team. Given the challenges of 2020, are there any other challenges looming for our members?
I think Max should discuss the ERO,
The ERO,
the
yeah,
ERO king.
So in December, we have the final instalment of the ERO for the Shads Award.
For us.
So the ERO's Equal Remuneration Order, which was an attempt to address the gender pay disparity across all industry, but particularly in the Shads Award because it was and continues to be a female-dominated industry. So that final payment in December is happening this year. And after that point, the Shads Award will only receive wage increases every July in line with the annual wage review increase and all the other awards. So we will be producing some December pay tables, and that will be hopefully our last set of December pay tables that we'll need to produce for the Shads Award. And it should reduce everyone down to a much more basic pay table structure as well. So you don't need to worry about New South Wales SACs to Shads, Victoria SACs to Shads, Northern Territory clerks and that sort of thing.
I think what was interesting is that we just got our July pay tables out. And am I correct in saying this, Max, that someone's already rung looking for the December pay tables?
Yeah, we have had a couple of calls. We had some calls even before the annual wage review increase of asking for the December pay tables, but I've already started working on them, so we should have them out shortly. They're on the back burner a little bit now because they're less urgent than, well, they were less urgent than the July ones, of course, and we have some coming out in November as well because of the staggered nature of this year's annual wage review increase, but we'll have them out well before December.
And just on that, Max, a common question that we get is there just a percentage you can give me what the ERO is going to be in December, which is, it's a hard question just to say it's X percent.
It is a difficult question. This year it will be a bit easier. So we can provide that information to people this year because it's the full amount, it's the full ERO amount. So we already know that full increase that people should have received compared to their wages 9 years ago. So we can provide that, but it is not as straightforward as just their current wage is going to increase by this amount. There is a fairly long calculation that will need to be performed to figure that out. We can streamline that over the phone and that sort of stuff as well, but it's another reason why we're going to be able to get the December pay tables out earlier this year.
And how many pay tables, just for the interest of people listening, did we produce just recently, Matt?
So the July ones, I think, and Brett will 34? Know as well. Was it 30? 34, 40?
Yeah, between 35 and 40 there was. Yeah.
And then we've still got some to produce for November as well.
Yeah.
So I think altogether we have between 45 and 50, but some won't receive an increase until November. So there was a mad rush between the announcement of the increase, the 1.75%, and then producing 35 to 40 pay tables to get out for the 1st of July.
And I think importantly here is that when Fair Work make the announcement about the increase, we actually have to wait for them to put their pay tables out before we put ours out. And I think, once it got to 12:01 a.m. on the 1st of July, the phones were running hot saying, where are the pay tables? And so short of putting a recorded message on our phones, it's really just about us waiting for that. So
that's right. And so we have to check our hourly rates and casual rates and that sort of stuff against the Fair Work Ombudsman because they're not open about the way that they perform their calculations. So there are always a few rounding issues. There's obviously a particular way that Fair Work Ombudsman produces their they come up with their minimum wages, and they're open about some aspects, but others, there's obviously some way that they treat rounding, which does produce 1 to 2 cent errors, and we're mindful of not providing our members with, it would be unlawful to recommend that people pay under the award, whether that's 1 cent or what have you. So we do then need to also make the pay tables and then check them against the Fair Work Ombudsman's.
I think the main issue, and again to refer it back to COVID, was because the minimum wage increase was pushed out and so close to the 1st of July was because of COVID. So that did put a lot of strain on our organisations about budgeting, with the short turnaround time of the announcement of the wage increase to it actually coming into effect for some awards, because it is staggered.
That's right. And so going back to the ERO, we will need to wait for the Fair Work Ombudsman to produce their ERO pay tables so that we can check ours against them, and then we can publish ours.
Yeah, perfect.
Another issue, which isn't major, but it's award modernisation that I touched on at the beginning of the webinar. So with the SHADS award, one aspect of the award modernisation is the addition of the casual loadings. The Commission decided to put that out before the rest of the award modernisation for the SHADS award. Some other examples for other awards would be, as part of the modernisation, they received annualised salary conditions in the awards, and they were pushed out before the rest of the award modernisation was as well. Some awards have already had their modernisation finalised.
Health services.
Health services, children's services, and you can identify those awards by the fact that they're now called, for example, Children's Services Award 2020 instead of 2010. And the major difference for all the awards in the modernisation process is just rewriting them in easier to understand English. I wouldn't go so as far as to say it's plain English, but they found that one major issue for employers and employees was that they couldn't understand or interpret the way that particular clauses were read, or that there were potentials for different interpretations. So they've revised the language to make it easier to understand and less legalese, I suppose. And we'll be producing some further information on major updates, if there are any others, to the SHADS award and the other awards that we cover. But as far as I know, the casual loading was the major one, and the rest will largely be revision of language for SHADS specifically.
Perfect. Thank you, Margaret, Max and Megan, for all of that information. That was fantastic. We have run out of time for our questions for this webinar. However, what we will do for all the questions that have been sent through, we will put together a list of responses and we'll send that out to all attendees. In the meantime, if you did want to get in touch with our workplace relations team or any of the JA team, please give us a call on the number provided or the email here, and we'll be happy to speak to you. We do have some upcoming webinars as well. So we have a webinar with Megan. So this will be around managing the risks of returning staff to work in this COVID environment. Margaret will then be hosting a webinar on redundancy. This will be on Tuesday, the 4th of August. And then Max will be speaking further about SHADS, which I'm sure there will still be many questions around that, and the snapshot of the complexities there. And this will be on Thursday, the 20th of August. If you have any questions about our upcoming webinars, please give us a call, or you can log on to our website, ja.com.au, to register. Thank you team, and thank you for attending.